Good morning, everyone. Morning, folks. It is 5:08 in the morning. I haven't slept since 2. I'm slightly dazed. So I feel like this is the perfect mind state to watch the sunrise and talk about peak experiences and psychedelics. This was prompted by a conversation with a friend of mine who was curious, who are in like adjacent circles, about like DMT and curious about those sorts of things, and she told me that she would be curious to hear my experience with psychedelics. So just a brief background on my opinion on psychedelics in general. I actively participate in taking them. As of now, which is the 1st of June, I haven't been taking them primarily because I've been experiencing peak moments within my day-to-day life sober, and that has been interesting in sort of sussing out like what sort of chemicals are going on in our brain constantly, and seeing what can come about when you achieve those sorts of states naturally without having to take psychoactive substances. It's been pretty interesting so far, mainly because I realized that when I do take psychoactive substances, they don't really do much, mainly because I've been careful in dosing. So over the past few months, in the beginning of this year, I've been ritualizing macro doses of psilocybin for therapeutic reasons. I have had conversations with people about how doing microdoses have helped them achieve a greater sense of like peace and understanding about themselves, with a level of introspection that they wouldn't have achieved if they didn't go through those peak experiences. And in like a macro dose level, you really get to have indescribable experiences that is apparently very hard to translate into text. So I thought it would be best to like get the middle ground and figure out what would be the best way for me to sort of feel like a sense of therapy with myself, like through these substances, without having to go on the deep end of being overwhelmed with visuals, with the meaning hydra like spewing shit at my face. I did that for a couple of months, and I'll tell you a particular story of one time that ended up being particularly therapeutic for me. So around February, I had been versed in being more aware, more specified with the set and setting that I put up for myself when going into these psychedelic experiences. So, getting water, orange juice, setting like a mat to lie down on, blinders to shut off all visual stimulation, layers of headphones for noise cancellation, as well as a psychedelic soundtrack. I used to use a Johns Hopkins playlist for psilocybin research. That did not end up going well, particularly because there was a classical track that triggered a very deep emotional sadness. I think it was a Penderecki track. Cascading strings that would just grow in intensity and weight. And I felt that experience so viscerally to the point where I ended up crying the entire time. So I'm not using that I did not decide to use that playlist again. So I curated my own specific playlist of electronic music. One album in particular that I've been using for microdoses and macrodoses is Music for Psychedelic Therapy by John Hopkins. So different Johns Hopkins. So funny. John Hopkins is an electronic artist that has been around for around 10 years, and he just released a collaboration with East Forest, which is another really good audio visual shaman type dude. They kind of linked up and created this soundscape of it's found sound collages of them kind of exploring the caves and doing live improvisations of electronic bleeps and bloops, as well as acoustic piano inside this cave. That ended up being a really good setting for this particular psychedelic experience. I even had a teddy bear on the side at the ready if I needed to hug something, as well as a notebook and a pen and paper. I decided to not use electronics at all for this session because I found myself really averse to being bombarded by my feeds. I was at a point in my life where I really was trying to step back and wondering what social media was doing to my life, which you can listen to in another video that I made yesterday. So fully analog, and all of that set up. Oh, and candles are so fucking important. The sense of smell I found really important to triggering sort of a proper setting when entering a sort of psychedelic therapy session. So I got some candles that smelled like apple pie and cinnamon, as well as some rose bushes, I think. That was really nice. You can tell that I went ham on this. All of that to say, yeah, set and setting, really important. On to the actual experience. Normally, when I take doses of psilocybin that are larger than 2 grams, this particular dose was 3 grams. It takes a while to hit. The average pace in which the chemical release starts to make a difference within the mind and the body usually takes around 2 to 3 hours, especially if you're brand new to it. For this particular session, it happened almost immediately, 10 to 30 minutes after I had ingested the whole dose, and I was not prepared for that. I had everything ready to situate myself in this space and just allow myself to take in everything. Well, I could feel myself getting a little tense in how quickly everything was happening and how unprepared that I was. But I decided to just roll with it and just lie down on my mat, curled up in a rainbow colored blanket, and put on my blinders, headphones, really situate myself and immerse. This time around, I would describe my experience of the visuals to be not as striking, not as colorful. I would, akin to what I was feeling, to be almost hyper visual. There wasn't any sort of geometric patterns or cascading waves and patterns that were being constantly streamed over my eyelids. It was more like my normal rate of consciousness, wherein constant amounts of ideas and concepts and media, whatever sort of cultural tapestry that I find myself swimming inside of my head, that ends up being hyper, everything all at once. If you taking EAAO as an example, that one scene where you really get to see all of the Evelyns passing through all the different forms, an exquisite corpse, every frame, that didn't last for long though, which was great. And I realized that that's probably just my brain just making a bunch of connections all at once, not necessarily focusing primarily on visuals. So I didn't really sit in total blindness for that long. I ended up taking the blinders off, actually, and seeing the environment that I set up for myself, which was the living room of the house that I was staying at the time. And some interesting things started to occur. This was around the time when I started to take interest in IFS, internal family systems. And from what had happened next, the best thing I could describe within this framework is basically a bunch of my parts, previous experiences of memories that I had experienced, abandonment, shame, guilt. So all of my exiles just showed up immediately. And I ended up acting as self therapist, self guidance counselor, almost little pieces of memories embodied in my psychosomatic space that I could interact with at a limited level, not to the point where I could converse with them, but having them have an equal idea that there is a felt sense that I am there and they can feel me as much as I can feel them. So I found myself, when I started interacting with them in the space, in the living room that I was in, dropping down to the memories in which these parts resided in. For example, when I was a kid, I was left alone when my family went out to go to a shopping mall. I was basically in the house all day. They kind of forgot about me or they probably thought that I was really sleepy and that I was sick, and they didn't want me to come and disturb me, so I was just left behind, and I was just in an empty house by myself the whole day. And a part of me was really sad that my family basically left me by myself without even wondering if I wanted to go with them. So the whole day I ended up spending playing a Ratchet and Clank game on PS2, and as soon as I remembered that, I had the intuition to pick up the second controller and play with him, in a sense. Like, it's not necessarily like a multiplayer game, but the fact that I wanted to communicate with him that he was not alone by, signaling that I'm playing with him in that moment. For some reason, I felt like a crack of a smile on his face. And that ended up being like a weirdly therapeutic moment to, sort of rewrite, or at least recontextualize that memory in time. And so, I just kept going. And as I was sort of interacting with these memories, I would go to different parts of my living room. So, like, that first memory, I would sit on a couch and play with him for like as long as I could with that video game. And then when I was done, when I felt like he had company, I decided to move my focus to like the next memory that I could immediately access, which was this memory of me like being bored on the school bus on the ride to like my elementary school, and I ended up pulling the emergency exit lever out of sheer curiosity. My bus driver ended up getting furious at me, and I just remember trying to defend myself as like a hapless child who wanted to see what would happen if you were to pull the red lever on the yellow thing, on the yellow bus. But this man just would not let up, and he would continually berate me of like, oh, you know what, like, I'm gonna call the principal on your ass. Like, just the amount of malice that I had felt in that moment, paired with the defenselessness that I had in being unable to like articulate just why I did the thing that I did. I sort of blended with a friend that was sitting next to me and sort of talked with him on my parts, like that memory part's behalf, and sort of acting as a de-escalator, but also like a savage, like funny way to diffuse the tension. Trying to stick up for myself when I wasn't able to, when it was happening. And that was another thing that had happened where I just felt like a weird wave of relief just flushing through my body. Like, it was a very cathartic experience, just feeling myself let go of certain memories that I've associated very deep, like feelings of shame and guilt, and being there for myself when I couldn't. It is still something that I think about a lot, and not something that I could immediately access. If it wasn't for taking part in that psychedelic experiences, I try to do that when it comes up, when those memories come up. But in that particular case, I feel like I had set myself up so well that I could be that self, when people go about from day-to-day life and certain things that they encounter end up triggering a very core memory that is linked to like that particular flavor of shame, it's very hard to introspect and rewrite that particular memory at the moment, because you're kind of in the space where you're kind of reliving it now. But in that particular case, it was a safe environment to sort of act as that counselor. Another thing that was really another thing that was really striking about that experience was how I was moving within the space. If you ever watched the movie Dune, there's a sort of way that people who live on the planet Arrakis, in order to prevent, the sandworms, Shai Hulud, getting track of where they are in the sand, they kind of like walk in a peculiar pattern, almost like curved in space, so that they can move with the rhythms of the sand. And when I was in this peak experience, I sort of moved my legs in very similar positions. Oh gosh, I guess there's another one like right underneath. You can't see it, but it's almost like I was writing cursive with my feet, and the ground was like my canvas, and I was like etching. Like at that moment, like it felt like I was etching like my new memories, like on the ground with my feet, in like a sort of dance, as like some sort of consolidation from my body that this is the way that I can remember these things now. And when I realized that, like that was a very beautiful moment to take in, and I almost like dropped down and like broke into tears. But I didn't do that until I went outside and moved the mat that I had placed in my living room out into the sun. And the track "Sit Around the Fire," which is the last track off of Music for Psychedelic Experience, or Music for Psychedelic Therapy, started playing. And as I was sitting lying down more so outside in that radiance and listening to Ram Dass just talking about how all we're going to do for eternity is sit around the fire, I felt this massive warmth that enveloped my body, like from the beginning of like my stomach up towards like my chest, my neck, my face, up to my crown, and then back down to like my feet. Once I was like open, like lying down, palms up, experiencing that moment, I couldn't help but just wash myself like through my tears and just allow release through that. That track honestly is one of my favorite tracks of all time. I say that a lot for a decent amount of things, but I would say this track means a lot to me because it reminds me that we're more than just we're more than just a body. We're more than just our thoughts. We aren't who we think we are. But we know that we're of the spirit if you let go of the confusion. If you say I don't know, I'm literally just rehashing things that Ram Dass says in the track. I'm not doing that track justice. I will probably link it in the description for people to check out if they're so inclined to listen to it in the proper setting. I highly recommend it. A part of me is a bit wary for accessing, those peak experiences again on a monthly basis because they were so powerful. I feel like it was good that I took a break with psilocybin in general, just so that I can see how that experience can weave itself into my everyday life, because it is pretty easily accessible if you sort of be open to it. I'm not gonna, claim and say here like, oh yeah, I'm just high all the fucking time, and I'm not gonna like prompt that for you, but just for me, in my experience, I don't need it, like, at the moment. And it's really cool to not have to need it, to experience those things again. Because I honestly thought that I would have to continually take those substances in order to recreate them, but just haven't had the inclination. Maybe I'm not discounting me having these experiences again. But right now, I would say that my relationship with psychedelics has a reasonable amount of like boundaries set up around it, that I can feel like healing is like very accessible at any moment with those substances, and even without those substances. Like, that has been like a big part of the path that I've been taking to access like a level of okayness that I would never have been aware of if I hadn't taken them. I was talking with my sister about how psilocybin in general, or that substance, isn't meant to simulate like or meant to like trigger peak experiences. It more so like expands the range of experience from like peak level to like deep yucky shit, and like really depends on like how you orient your mind and your environment to catch yourself when you have that high degree of openness available to you. Imagine if you already have a high degree of openness. Jesus Christ. Yeah. Apparently I'm 98th percentile according to the Big 5 personality. Fun fact. That was really fucking weird to realize for the first time, but it also makes sense. Also wondering if like high degree of openness corresponds to like high sensitivity. A friend of mine considers herself like a highly sensitive person, and I've always wondered like if I could categorize myself as that. Now that I'm realizing like I am, to the degree that I am open to like a very narrow set of like experience, particularly rooted around music. And whenever I like listen to a piece of media like one time and like I cry, like every time I listen to it, like I will end up crying. And I think this is probably like a segment for another video, but I'm just pondering. Also, this is almost 30 minutes, so I want to see how long I can put this on for. I will definitely talk about all the things that I talked about over the past couple of minutes in another video, but I want to wrap this up, and the sun has dissipated into the air. So thank you for watching the sunrise with me. Thank you for listening to me talking about psychedelic experiences. I really like showing up here, and I'll talk to you soon.